It launched vertically like a missile, powered by a volatile chemical cocktail more likely to kill its own pilot than any Allied bomber. In 1945, the Luftwaffe traded high-grade steel for plywood and desperation, strapping inexperienced young pilots into near-suicidal rocket sleds and pointing them at the sky. This is every suicide and rocket interceptor of the Luftwaffe. Let's dive in. The Me-163 Komet. The Messerschmitt. Me-163 Komet was the world's first, and only, rocket-powered fighter to see combat. Capable of a blistering 960 kilometers per hour, it made every Allied escort fighter look like it was standing still. But its C-STOF and T-STOF propellants were so volatile they dissolved human flesh on contact, and landing gear was jettisoned on takeoff. Pilots glided home on a skid and prayed. Its combat window lasted roughly 90 seconds before the fuel burned out entirely, leaving the Komet a glider in hostile skies. Terrifying to face, more terrifying to fly. The Bachem Ba 349. Natter next up, the aircraft that blurred the line between fighter jet and disposable missile. If the Me-163 was desperate, the Ba 349 Natter was completely insane. Designed by Erich Bachem in 1944, the Natter, German for Viper, was the Luftwaffe's most radical last-ditch solution yet. It launched vertically from a wooden pole, powered by a Walter HWK-509 rocket motor, assisted by 4 solid fuel boosters. Its entire airframe was constructed from non-strategic materials, primarily plywood, because Germany simply couldn't spare aluminum anymore. The Reich was bleeding out industrially, and it showed in every splinter. The mission profile was almost ritualistic in its brutality. An inexperienced pilot, often with minimal flight training, would ride the Natter straight up into a bomber formation, fire an unguided rocket salvo from its nose, then eject the entire cockpit section, separating from the fuselage mid-air while both pilot and engine descended by separate parachutes for theoretical recovery. Theoretical because the only manned test flight on February 28, 1945, killed test pilot Lothar Sieber instantly when the cockpit canopy tore away seconds after launch. The ghost of German engineering had officially become its own worst enemy. The Heinkel He 162 Volksjäger, moving on to the weapon that exposed the ultimate contradiction of Nazi air power, a revolutionary jet fighter built by a collapsing empire. The Heinkel He 162 Volksjäger, People's Fighter, was Germany's attempt to mass-produce a jet interceptor using non-strategic materials and semi-skilled labor, including concentration camp workers under horrific conditions. Designed, prototyped, and pushed into production in a staggering 90 days, it represented both a genuine engineering achievement and a monument to desperation. Powered by a single BMW 003 turbojet mounted above the fuselage in a distinctive dorsal position, the HE-162 reached speeds of 840 kilometers per hour, genuinely competitive with anything the Allies were flying. Its wooden tail assembly, however, was bonded with a corrosive low-grade adhesive called Tego film, which caused multiple catastrophic in-flight disintegrations during testing. Pilots were dying before they ever saw an enemy aircraft. The Volksjäger program planned to produce 4,000 units per month and crew them with Hitler Youth members converted into pilots through glider training alone, trading years of combat experience for warm bodies and blind ideology. By May 1945, roughly 300 had been built. Perhaps 50 saw any combat at all. The people's fighter never saved the people. The Focke-Wulf Volksjäger and experimental jet proposals. Next on the list, the designs that never left the drawing board, but revealed just how frantically the Luftwaffe was grasping for salvation. While Heinkel was rushing the He-162 into production, Focke-Wulf's chief designer Kurt Tank was developing his own competing Volksjäger proposal. The Focke-Wulf Ta-183 Huckebein, featuring a radical swept-wing design and a single Heinkel He 011 turbojet buried in the fuselage, the Ta-183 was arguably more aerodynamically advanced than anything Germany actually fielded. It never entered production, but its design DNA lived on. Soviet and Argentine engineers studied captured blueprints extensively post-war, directly influencing the MiG-15 and Argentina's FMA IAE-33 Pulki II. Then there was the Heinkel HE-500 and the Junkers EF-128. Swept-wing single-engine jet proposals, competing under the Emergency Fighter Program of 1944. Each promised performance beyond the He-162, and each was strangled by the same brutal reality. No raw materials, no functioning factories, no time. Perhaps most haunting was the projected ramjet interceptor concept, which proposed dispensing with conventional engines entirely, using pure ramjet propulsion at the cost of requiring a rocket-assisted launch every single mission. Germany was designing the future while drowning in the present. The Zeppelin Rammer and Sonderkommando Elbe. Finally, we arrive at the darkest corner of Luftwaffe history, the point where engineering gave way entirely to human sacrifice. The Zeppelin Rammer, officially the Fliegende Panzerfaust or Flying Bazooka, was a piloted rocket interceptor designed around a single, irreversible mission profile. The pilot would ram his aircraft directly into Allied bombers at closing speeds exceeding 900 kilometers per hour. The design included a theoretically survivable ejection system, but structural engineers privately acknowledged the pilot's survival chances were effectively zero. It remained a prototype, but the ideology behind it was already being practiced in the sky. Sonderkommando Elbe was that ideology made flesh. Formed in early 1945 under Colonel Hajo Hermann, it was a volunteer unit of Luftwaffe pilots tasked with ramming Allied bombers using stripped-down Bf-109s, all unnecessary weight removed, leaving just enough fuel for a one-way intercept. Pilots were instructed to ram the tail or cockpit section and then attempt to bail out. But at those speeds and altitudes, bailing out was largely theoretical. On April 7, 1945, roughly 120 Elbe pilots launched against a massive American bomber stream. They downed an estimated 15 to 23 bombers and lost the majority of their own men doing it. It wasn't a victory. It was a eulogy written in aviation fuel and desperation. The Messerschmitt Me, 263, and late-war rocket development, moving on to the aircraft that proved Germany could still innovate brilliantly and implement catastrophically. The Messerschmitt Me, 263, designated the Ju 248 during development under Junkers, was the direct evolutionary successor to the Me 163 Komet. Engineers had learned every brutal lesson the Komet had to teach. The Me 263 featured a retractable tricycle undercarriage, eliminating the murderous skid landing profile that had killed and maimed so many Komet pilots. Its improved Walter HWK-509C rocket motor offered throttle control across multiple thrust stages, a revolutionary advancement over the Komet's essentially binary burn profile. Fuel capacity was dramatically increased, extending the agonizing 90-second combat window of the Me 163 to a far more tactically viable endurance. The cockpit was pressurized, the ejection system was improved. On paper, the Me 263 addressed nearly every fatal flaw of its predecessor, but paper was all it ever became. Allied bombing had systematically strangled German industrial output by late 1944. The factories capable of producing the HES-011 engine the Me 263 ultimately needed were rubble. Prototype testing continued into early 1945, but full production never materialized. The Me 263 was Germany's clearest proof that genius without resources is just an expensive blueprint. The Lippisch projects and Tailless rocket interceptors. Next up, the designs that looked less like aircraft and more like fragments of a fever dream. Alexander Lippisch was the aerodynamic mind behind the Me 163's distinctive tailless delta configuration, and by 1944, he was pushing that philosophy to its absolute limits. Working under the Luftfahrtforschungsanstalt Wien Research Institute in Vienna, Lippisch developed a series of increasingly radical interceptor proposals that abandoned conventional aircraft design almost entirely. The Lippisch P-13A was perhaps the most audacious, a tailless delta ramjet interceptor designed to burn coal dust as fuel, not aviation gasoline, not rocket propellant, coal. Because by 1944, Germany had coal and almost nothing else. Wind tunnel testing showed genuinely promising aerodynamic performance, and a glider testbed, the DM-1, was constructed and partially tested before American forces captured the facility. The Lippisch P-20 pushed further still. A pure rocket interceptor with a near-triangular planform that anticipated the supersonic delta-wing configurations that would dominate jet fighter design throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Post-war, American engineers shipped the DM-1 glider directly to NACA, the predecessor to NASA, where it directly informed early supersonic research. Lippisch was designing aircraft for a war that hadn't happened yet, inside a country that was already lost. If you made it this far, you already know this rabbit hole goes deeper. Every prototype, every test flight, every pilot who strapped into a rocket and hoped for the best, drop a comment with your favorite desperate Luftwaffe design, and subscribe for the next deep dive. The history is darker, stranger, and more fascinating than you think.